Hey everyone, welcome to This Week in Vegas History. I'm really excited to have spun off our little segment on Vegas Weekly, and now it's got its own show. We're going to be here every Wednesday talking for a few minutes about different parts of Las Vegas history. I'm going to start it out today talking about the D. If you're just catching this program for the first time, you'll definitely want to hit that subscribe button and go back and take a look at our Vegas Weekly broadcasts over the last several months. We've been talking about downtown Las Vegas and particularly Fremont Street and how it's changed over the course of, well, nearly a century. And this week we are up to the 300 block of Fremont Street. And the south side of that block is the location of what we now know as the D Hotel and Casino. But it wasn't always the D. In fact, it wasn't always a casino. The earliest evidence I could find for any sort of major construction on this site was the Nevada Building, which was built in the mid-1950s and was an office building, also housed some retail on the ground floor. And it remained so until the late 1970s, 1979, when a new hotel was erected on that site called the Sundance. That's right. There's a trivia question. What was the D originally called? People probably won't guess the Sundance. Now, the Sundance was the brainchild of the now 84-year-old Moe Dalitz. Yes, there's a name we've heard many times in our discussions of Vegas history, and no doubt his name will appear again and again. Not surprisingly, this property was immediately in the eyes of law enforcement, and Dalitz was stepped back almost immediately from having any direct control over the operation, but at least for a few years, some of his associates ran the property, probably to the advantage of some of his other associates, perhaps outside of Las Vegas. By 1984, he was basically forced to turn over the day-to-day operations of the casino to the venerable Jackie Goen. And there's another name that keeps popping up, certainly as we talk about downtown history. And in a few years, Dalitz and his associates were forced to sell off the property. There was a company that had built a hotel in Reno called Fitzgerald's. They purchased the Sundance and they rebranded it as Fitzgerald's Las Vegas. It had a Luck of the Irish theme, and there was a lot of green, if you can remember that. It hasn't been that many years since it was Fitzgerald's, less than 10 years ago. One thing to remember about the building is that when it was built, first topped out in 1979, it became the tallest structure, not only downtown, but anywhere in Las Vegas, and in fact, anywhere in Nevada. And it retained that title as the tallest structure until 1994, when the Stratosphere surpassed it. And since that's not considered a fully habitable building, it actually held that title until 1997, when it was surpassed by New York, New York. Fitzgerald's would operate the property until 2001, when faced with bankruptcy, they would sell it along with a couple of out-of-state casinos to Don Barden and his Majestic Star Casino Corporation. When Barden closed the deal, he became the first African-American casino owner in Las Vegas history. And Barden would make some cosmetic changes and improvements to the property over the 10 years that he would own it. Sadly, Barden passed away in 2011. And a few months later, his estate would sell the property to the majority owners of the Golden Gate, Greg and Derek Stevens. Derek, the managing partner in the operation, would announce shortly thereafter that the place was going to get a complete facelift. It was going to get a new name, remodel of all the rooms in the casino. It was to be called the D. Perhaps an homage to Derek's first name, but more likely an homage to the city that he called home for so many years, Detroit. So there's kind of a Detroit-themed casino in Las Vegas, kind of. Well, the American Coney Dog is based on a restaurant of the same name in Detroit, at least. So the D has become one of probably the most prominent players in the downtown market over the years. The casino is on 2 floors, which is a little bit unusual for Las Vegas. The first floor with a very sort of hip, modern theme. You've got dancing dealers, you've got flair bartenders, loud music everywhere. But the second floor having more of a vintage Las Vegas feel, some older slots, the only remaining Sigma Derby horse racing machine anywhere in Las Vegas, and a very different vibe. The D has been one of the casinos that has been most, I would say, friendly towards new media from the very beginning. Inviting, podcasters and vloggers throughout that time. Derek Stevens is certainly one of the most available casino owners you'll find anywhere in Las Vegas. In fact, many nights you'll find him sitting at the Long Bar at the D. I approached him on one occasion, shook his hand, thanked him for what he'd done. Very personable gentleman, and there's a number that seems to be a philosophy, at least at the D, to try to sort of give back to the community and give a somewhat more personal experience than one can get on the Strip or even at most of the downtown properties. So the D continues to thrive, and of course the D ownership is now in the process of completing the massive Circa project, which will then make it the tallest building downtown. There are a few other businesses scattered along the block between 3rd and 4th Street, mostly at this point little tacky, touristy souvenir shops and, tin t-shirts for $1, cheap water, cheap beer, that sort of thing. It is interesting to note that included in what is now the footprint of the D was an area that at one time, back in the 30s and 40s, was a J.C. Penney, and during much of the 60s and 70s was a McDonald's. And interestingly enough, that McDonald's was more or less incorporated into the Sundance, Fitzgerald's, and remains to this day in the D. So that's a little history about the what we now call the D Hotel and Casino and the block it sits on. As you can see, we've kind of come to the end of the hotels under the canopy of the Fremont Street experience. We will do a couple more shows talking about some of the developments downtown. There's a little bit to be said about the properties across the street and down into Fremont East. We'll certainly do a show talking about the El Cortez and the environs around there. If you enjoyed our program today, give it a thumbs up. We really do appreciate it. If you have any comments, any questions about the D or anything downtown, or any your memories of any of these properties, I would love to hear from you. So until next week, or until Saturday, if you join us on Vegas Weekly, I hope that you have a historically terrific day. We'll see you soon.